The CEO invited me to lunch only to fire me and replace me with the owner's nephew. These things happen, I replied with a smile. No one realized that I'd seen it coming for months. My name is Elena Marks, 42 years old, and for 11 years, I'd been the backbone of Halcyon Industrial's IT division. Not that you'd know it from the company's glossy brochures or the annual reports. I had rebuilt their digital systems from the ground up, starting back when passwords were scribbled on sticky notes and servers crashed if someone sneezed too hard. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. I took the job after my divorce, a temporary stop to keep my mind busy. But somehow those blinking servers and buzzing networks became mine. Not legally, of course, but in every way that counted. The lunch was at Montclair's, a high-end steakhouse where deals were sealed over rare filet and vintage Cabernet. Definitely not the place you'd expect to get fired. But Preston Langston, our CEO, was a man obsessed with appearances. "Elena, you've been invaluable," Preston said, cutting into his steak like he hadn't just dropped a bomb. "But we need fresh perspectives. Someone who can lead Halcyon's digital future." Translation: they found someone younger and cheaper who wouldn't question the board's half-baked ideas. Someone like Cameron Blake, the owner's freshly minted MBA nephew, who probably thought cybersecurity was just another app. I nodded, sipping my water. "Who's handling the transition?" Preston's face visibly relaxed, relieved I wasn't making a scene. "You'll have 6 weeks. We'll announce it after the quarterly town hall." I signed the NDA. He slid across the table without a word, smiled, and shook his hand. Business decisions, after all. No point crying over a ship you knew was sinking. When I returned to my desk, I noticed my system privileges had already been trimmed. My name was quietly removed from the leadership distribution lists. The HR system listed my role as transitional advisor. They'd made the decision weeks ago. Today was just a formality. That night, lying awake, I wasn't angry, not exactly. I wasn't even worried about my next job. I was thinking about something else. Something I'd spotted months earlier buried in the server logs. Unauthorized access attempts. Tiny digital fingerprints leading back to the executive floor. They weren't just replacing me. They were mining me. Combing through my private documentation, tracing the hidden layers of security I had built to keep Halcyon running through storms, cyber attacks, and blackouts. They thought they were playing chess. They didn't realize they were moving pieces on a board I had designed. And I never built a board without a few hidden moves of my own. Montclair's was the kind of restaurant where deals were made. Not broken white tablecloths, polished silverware, and a view of the city skyline. Definitely not the place to be fired. But for Preston Langston, appearances mattered more than people. After signing the severance papers, I returned to my desk and found my administrative credentials already downgraded. My name had vanished from the leadership team distribution list. The decision had been made long before that lunch. The meeting was just a formality. I allowed myself a small, humorless smile. Typical Preston. That night, sleep refused to come. It wasn't fear keeping me awake. Halcyon's loss would be someone else's gain soon enough. It was anger. Not because I had been let go, but because of what I had noticed months earlier. Server logs filled with unauthorized access attempts. IP addresses traced to the executive floor. Someone had been snooping through my system maps, my proprietary tools, my contingency plans. They weren't just replacing me. They were stripping me for parts first. 16 years ago, I moved to Milwaukee for love. After my divorce blindsided me, I was sleeping on a friend's couch when Halcyon hired me to patch their broken IT after a ransomware attack. I didn't just patch it. I rebuilt it from the ground up. Every server rack, every line of code, every protocol for disaster recovery, all mine in the ways that mattered most. Now, after more than a decade of loyalty, I was being replaced by Cameron Blake, the chairman's nephew. A shining MBA, a fresh face, a politically perfect pawn. I knew this game. What they didn't know was that I had been preparing for it far longer than they realized. 2 nights after the lunch, I stayed late at the office. The hum of servers was oddly comforting. A reminder that while people might be fickle, good systems were dependable. As I ran final system checks, Cameron appeared in the doorway, casual confidence oozing from every pore. "Working late?" he asked, stepping inside without invitation. "Routine maintenance," I said, not looking up. "I hear you'll be showing me the ropes soon." His tone was light but edged with arrogance. That's the plan, I replied coolly. He wandered around, studying the server setup like a man inspecting his new kingdom. Solid infrastructure. A little old school but solid, he mused aloud. Old school? I had upgraded these systems just 8 months ago. I've been going through your documentation, Cameron added. Impressive work. I have a few ideas for modernization. Looking forward to hearing them. I lied smoothly. When he left, I sat back down and opened the server logs. Cameron's account had been created 3 weeks before my termination lunch. Top-level access. He had already downloaded my entire documentation library. I leaned back in my chair, the pieces locking into place. They thought they were replacing me. What they didn't realize was that documentation only showed the surface. The true architecture, the hidden redundancies, the fail-safes, the soul of Halcyon systems, lived in my mind. And I wasn't about to hand that over. The next morning I texted Vanessa Rivera, my most trusted engineer. Coffee. Joe's Diner. 6:30 a.m. No explanation. If she was still loyal, she would understand. When I arrived, she was already there. A steaming cup in front of her, tension written across her face. It's bad, isn't it? She said before I could even sit down. I nodded. They've been setting this up for months. Cameron's had access to everything. They're mining our work to make a clean handoff. Vanessa's jaw tightened. And pretending it's all fresh innovation when really, it's years of your blood, sweat, and caffeine. I smiled despite myself. Exactly. What's the plan? She asked, voice low. I'm not sabotaging anything, I said. But I'm not giving them the keys to my kingdom either. They think the documentation is enough, but it's not. Not even close. She leaned in. You need help. I need backups. Original designs, not company property. Personal notes. Records of who contributed to what. Quietly. Vanessa nodded once. I'm in. I left the diner feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Not because of revenge. Because of clarity. They had made their move. Now it was my turn. Officially, my transition with Cameron began that Monday. Preston made a big show of it at the weekly leadership meeting, calling it a smooth and strategic handoff, while Cameron smiled like a man who thought he was inheriting an empire. Behind the scenes, it was chaos. Cameron didn't understand the systems beyond surface level. He asked basic questions about network redundancy, mistook sandbox environments for live servers, and proposed changes that would have crippled production. Every time I tried to explain the complexities, he brushed me off. Don't worry, he said once, waving a hand. We'll modernize all this soon. Standard cloud solutions are the future. I didn't argue. I documented his decisions meticulously. Every ignored warning. Every shortcut he insisted on taking. Every security risk he introduced. Paper trails were powerful weapons when wielded correctly. Meanwhile, Vanessa and I worked quietly. We secured personal copies of development logs, backup protocols, vendor agreements, anything that proved the depth of the systems we had built and how intertwined they were with my original frameworks. By the third week, small cracks began to show. Minor system glitches escalated into overnight outages. Data backups started failing. Cameron blamed the team, not realizing the intricacies he dismissed were the very things that kept Halcyon running smoothly. One evening, as I was shutting down my workstation, Vanessa appeared at my door, face pale. You need to see this, she said, handing me a flash drive. On it were emails, Cameron's communications with an outside consulting firm. They detailed plans to replace our custom infrastructure with a third-party system. One owned by a company where Cameron's former college roommate was a partner. It wasn't modernization. It was a setup. They planned to gut Halcyon's backbone, dress it up, and cash out before the real damage showed. I stared at the screen, a slow, cold anger settling in. They hadn't just underestimated me. They'd underestimated the entire foundation holding their empire together. The next morning, I sat in my car outside Halcyon's headquarters, sipping coffee and thinking. I had evidence now, Cameron's emails, the mishandling of systems, the clear breach of fiduciary duty. But I needed more than evidence. I needed leverage that would hit before they could spin the narrative. By noon, I'd made my decision. I called Olivia Benson, an old friend from college who now worked in corporate compliance. She picked up on the second ring. Maeve Ellis. Haven't heard from you since you aced everyone in that security breach case. I chuckled. I need a little advice. Off the record. When I explained the situation, she didn't hesitate. If the owner's nephew is colluding to defraud the company for personal gain, that's serious. Especially if Halcyon is preparing for a merger or acquisition. I hadn't known about any acquisition talks. Olivia's comment made my heart thud harder. If Halcyon was trying to sell, my systems would be a key selling point, and Cameron's sabotage would be catastrophic. Document everything, Olivia advised. Timeline it all. When you're ready, send it directly to the board. Not to Preston. Not to Cameron. Straight to the directors. That night I barely slept. Over the weekend I compiled a full report. System designs, original IP created before my employment, email trails showing Cameron's unauthorized access and conflicts of interest. Every reckless decision he made documented with timestamps. On Monday I dressed sharply, a power suit I hadn't worn in years, and walked into Halcyon as if it were any other day. At 9 a.m. I sent the report. Not to Preston. Not to HR. Directly to the board's private distribution list, one I still had from my leadership days. By 10 a.m. the first signs appeared. The CFO's assistant hurried through the halls, her face flushed. Preston was summoned upstairs for an urgent meeting. Cameron vanished from the floor. I sat at my desk answering emails, acting perfectly normal. At noon, Vanessa texted me. They're freaking out in the executive suite. I allowed myself a small smile. Good. At 3 p.m. my phone rang. It was the board chairman's office. Ms. Ellis, could you join us for a discussion? When I walked into the boardroom, the atmosphere was tense. Preston sat stiffly at one end of the table. Cameron slouched beside him, pale and sweaty. The chairman, Mr. Whitmore, gestured to a seat across from him. Maeve, thank you for bringing these concerns to our attention, he said gravely. We'd like to hear more from you off the record for now. I nodded calmly and began to speak, laying out everything I knew. Every risk. Every betrayal. As I talked, I could feel Preston's anger simmering. Cameron couldn't even meet my gaze. By the end, Mr. Whitmore leaned back, steepling his fingers. You've given us much to consider, he said. Please remain available for follow-up discussions. As I left the room, I caught Preston's furious glare. It didn't faze me. They had underestimated the wrong woman. And this time I was playing for keeps. The next day, Halcyon buzzed like a kicked beehive. Rumors spread fast. Cameron had been escorted from the building late last night. Preston hadn't been seen all morning. Vanessa messaged me mid-morning. Emergency executive meeting. Doors closed. Everyone's on edge. I worked steadily, answering a few project emails, pretending I didn't know exactly what was happening. At noon, the official announcement came. A curt company-wide email. Effective immediately, Cameron Vance is no longer employed at Halcyon Technologies. We thank him for his service and wish him well. No mention of me. No mention of the real reason behind his departure. Typical. But that wasn't my concern anymore. I had bigger plans. At 2 p.m., Mr. Whitmore's office called again. Ms. Ellis, would you please join us upstairs? When I entered the boardroom, only Mr. Whitmore and 2 other board members were there. The mood was heavier this time, more deliberate. Maeve, Mr. Whitmore began. After reviewing the situation thoroughly, we recognize your pivotal role in building and maintaining Halcyon's tech division. I remained silent, letting him speak. We would like to offer you the position of Chief Information Officer, reporting directly to the board. I blinked once. Slowly. CIO. Full executive privileges. Reporting above Preston. He continued. We believe your leadership and integrity are exactly what Halcyon needs as we navigate this transitional phase. I sat back in my chair, pretending to consider it, though I already knew my answer. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I have conditions. Mr. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. Go on. First, I said, full autonomy over IT and cybersecurity. No interference from executive management without board approval. Agreed, he said immediately. Second, a full audit of all recent system changes and vendor contracts initiated under Cameron's leadership. Already in progress. And third, I finished, a new infrastructure investment plan. Top-to-bottom modernization, proper documentation teams, full training for all staff. Mr. Whitmore smiled slightly. We had a feeling you might say that. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a proposed budget, double what I'd had before. Full control. And Preston? I asked. He will remain CEO for now, Whitmore said, his tone cooling. But his authority over IT and operations is suspended until further notice. His future with the company depends largely on how he handles the transition. In other words, Preston was on thin ice. I nodded slowly. Then I accept. As I walked out of that boardroom, my heels clicking sharply against the polished floor, I knew the tide had turned. Halcyon was mine to rebuild. Properly. On my terms. No more being sidelined. No more underestimation. The girl they thought they could discard? She was about to save the very company that tried to break her. The next few weeks were some of the most intense and rewarding of my career. Vanessa, Luis, and a handful of loyal team members rallied around me. Together, we launched a full-scale overhaul of Halcyon's fractured IT systems. Gone were the patchwork fixes and half-baked cloud integrations Cameron had tried to force through. In their place, a solid, scalable foundation built properly from the ground up. Every night I stayed late, walking through server rooms, reviewing architecture diagrams, ensuring no corner of the system went unexamined. Vanessa joked one evening as we ate takeout at our desks. It's like we're rebuilding a house that was still on fire. She wasn't wrong. Meanwhile, word about the leadership change spread beyond Halcyon's walls. Clients who had grown wary during the instability started reaching out again, cautiously at first, then with real enthusiasm. One afternoon, Mr. Whitmore called me into his office. Maeve, he said, smiling for the first time in weeks. The Tarsus contract is officially renewed. They cited your leadership specifically in their decision. Tarsus was our largest client. Losing them would have crippled Halcyon. I allowed myself a rare, genuine smile. Good. But we're just getting started. Behind the scenes, Preston tried to cling to relevance. He pushed back against budget allocations, inserted himself into meetings he wasn't invited to, sent passive-aggressive emails questioning technical decisions he barely understood. First, I ignored him, but when he tried to delay critical infrastructure upgrades by insisting on executive review, I scheduled a private meeting with Mr. Whitmore. Preston's interference is hindering progress, I said bluntly. If Halcyon wants to survive, decisions about technology must remain insulated from outdated ego battles. Whitmore didn't argue. 2 days later, Preston was quietly placed on a leave of absence. No official announcement. No fanfare. Just gone. Vanessa brought cupcakes into the office that day. For morale, she said with a wink. But I knew better. It was a celebration. Quiet but fierce. I spent that evening alone in my office, watching the city lights flicker against the glass. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't bracing for the next slight, the next betrayal. Halcyon was healing. And so was I. Later that night, as I packed up to leave, my phone buzzed. A message from Mr. Whitmore. The board approved your long-term infrastructure plan. Full funding. Congratulations, CIO Ellis. I stared at the screen for a long moment before slipping the phone into my bag. They'd tried to replace me. They'd underestimated me. Now they were betting the future of the company on me. Funny how things turn out. 6 months later, Halcyon Systems was barely recognizable, in the best possible way. The network infrastructure was rebuilt, resilient and scalable. Critical backups functioned seamlessly. Security protocols were no longer an afterthought but a cornerstone of every project. Our client retention rate soared to 98%. New contracts came flooding in, some from companies that had once written us off as outdated and unstable. And the team? The team was thriving. Vanessa was promoted to Director of IT Operations, Luis led a newly formed cybersecurity division, and fresh talent flowed in, drawn by the reputation we were rapidly building under my leadership. During a quarterly board meeting, Mr. Whitmore made it official. Halcyon's turnaround is one of the most remarkable recoveries in our company's history. None of it would have been possible without Maeve Ellis. The applause that filled the room was genuine, not the hollow politeness I had grown so accustomed to. Afterward, as people gathered to celebrate, I stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking the city skyline. The cool evening air was sharp with the scent of rain. I thought back to the lunch at Maxwell's, the false smiles, the empty promises. I thought about the server rooms late at night, the whispered doubts, the silent betrayals. None of it mattered now. They had tried to replace me with someone younger, cheaper, easier to manipulate. They thought loyalty was a weakness. They thought knowledge could be downloaded. They thought resilience could be copied. They were wrong. I had outlasted them all. Not through revenge, not through sabotage, but by doing what I had always done. Building something that could stand when everything else fell apart. As I turned back toward the party, my phone buzzed with a new email. A message from an old recruiter. Are you open to exploring a CTO role at another firm? 6-figure signing bonus, full relocation package. I smiled, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and rejoined my team. I wasn't going anywhere. Halcyon wasn't just where I worked anymore. It was what I had rebuilt from ashes with my own 2 hands. This was my home now. And this time no one was taking it away.